The first vertebrates to leave the water did not march neatly toward the modern world. Evolution did not move in a straight line. They spread through swamps, rivers, floodplains, forests, and shallow seas, producing bodies that often seemed to belong to a different version of Earth. Some walked on stronger limbs. Others slipped back into the water, lost their limbs, grew sails, armored their backs, or carried skulls shaped like boomerangs. Across the late Paleozoic, the boundary between fish-like animals, amphibian-like forms, reptile relatives, and something else entirely was far less familiar than it is today. This was the first great radiation of four-limbed vertebrate life. Among the strangest of them all was Diplocaulus, one of the most iconic Paleozoic amphibian-like animals ever discovered. It lived during the late Carboniferous and Permian in the waterways of North America, and at first glance resembled an oversized salamander with a long tail and relatively weak limbs. But its skull was extraordinary, massively widened into two enormous lateral projections that gave the head the unmistakable shape of a boomerang. Even today, paleontologists continue debating why such an anatomy evolved. One possibility is hydrodynamics. The strange skull may have acted like an underwater stabilizer, helping the animal remain close to the bottom while currents flowed over its body. Another hypothesis suggests defense. Swallowing an animal with a head wider than its body would have been extremely difficult for predators. Some researchers have even proposed that a membrane of skin may have stretched from the skull tips toward the body, perhaps helping it camouflage itself against muddy riverbeds. Diplocaulus belonged to the lepospondals, an enigmatic group whose evolutionary relationships remain controversial. Some studies place lepospondals closer to modern amphibians, while others suggest they may instead be more closely related to amniotes. Their true affinities remain unresolved, a reminder of how strange and poorly understood many Paleozoic tetrapod lineages still are. Another lineage took a completely different route. Platyhystrix carried its strangeness upward. This small temnospondyle possessed a tall dorsal sail formed by elongated neural spines rising from its back. The resemblance to Dimetrodon, and even to the much later Spinosaurus, is striking, despite these animals belonging to very different tetrapod groups. It is a clear example of convergent evolution, unrelated lineages arriving at similar structures under similar pressures. The sail may have helped with thermoregulation, allowing the animal to absorb heat more quickly in cool mornings. It may also have functioned as a visual display for communication, territorial behavior, or mate recognition. Whatever its exact role, Platyhystrix shows how similar structures could appear again and again across distant branches of life. In the rivers of the Permian, size itself could become a weapon. Prionosuchus was the clearest example. Reaching lengths of more than 5.5 meters, it was the largest true amphibian predator ever known. Its elongated skull resembled that of a modern gharial, lined with powerful conical teeth perfectly adapted for seizing fish and smaller vertebrates. This giant temnospondyle inhabited tropical river systems during the Middle Permian and likely functioned as an apex predator in aquatic ecosystems. Its existence is especially fascinating because it lived during a time when synapsids, distant relatives of mammals, were becoming increasingly dominant on land. While some vertebrates were adapting to dry environments and evolving more fully terrestrial lifestyles, giant semi-aquatic predators like Prionosuchus, still ruled the rivers and swamps. The move onto land was never irreversible. Some early tetrapods became even more committed to the water. Crassigyrinus represents one of the most extreme examples. This enigmatic predator, which could grow nearly 2 meters long, possessed a serpentine body, tiny reduced limbs, and a massive skull filled with enormous teeth. Unlike many early tetrapods, its eyes faced forward, suggesting a degree of stereoscopic vision that may have helped it judge distances while ambushing prey underwater. Despite its amphibian-like appearance, Crassigyrinus was not a true amphibian. It belonged to a very early branch of tetrapods that diverged before the split between amphibians and amniotes. Rather than continuing toward a more terrestrial existence, it became almost fully aquatic again. Its anatomy shows that early tetrapod history was not a single road from water to land, but a set of lineages moving in very different directions. Greer-Erpeton shows that this aquatic inheritance remained deeply embedded in early tetrapods. A member of the Colosteids, its long body, laterally compressed tail, and relatively small limbs made it well adapted for life in water. Even more remarkable were the sensory canals preserved on its skull, structures similar to the lateral line system of fish that allowed it to detect vibrations underwater. Greer-Erpeton is particularly important because it retained many fish-like traits, despite standing close to the early radiation of true tetrapods, illustrating just how gradual and complex the transition from aquatic to terrestrial vertebrates truly was. On land, a different set of pressures was shaping the body. Pederpes, one of the earliest known watcherids, appears to have been capable of relatively effective terrestrial locomotion. Unlike more archaic tetrapods, whose limbs sprawled awkwardly sideways, Pederpes had stronger forward-facing limbs better suited for walking. Its name means reptile foot, referring to the more advanced structure of its limbs. Yet it still retained aquatic features, including a relatively long tail and a reproduction linked to the water environment. It was a transitional creature inhabiting both muddy shorelines and shallow waters. To understand how unusual this transition really was, we have to look even farther back. Acanthostega is famous for possessing 8 digits on each limb. Today, nearly all tetrapods descend from ancestors with 5 digits, but during the Devonian, there was extraordinary variation in limb anatomy. Despite having well-developed limbs and digits, Acanthostega remained primarily aquatic. Internal gills, a powerful swimming tail, and weak limb joints show that it was poorly suited for supporting itself on land. This discovery fundamentally changed how scientists interpreted the origin of fingers and toes. Digits did not initially evolve for walking on land. Instead, they may first have functioned in navigating dense underwater vegetation or maneuvering through shallow aquatic environments. Tiktaalik reveals the same story from the fish side of the transition. Living around 375 million years ago in shallow, muddy waters, Tiktaalik possessed a remarkable mixture of fish and tetrapod traits. It still had scales and fins, yet the internal bones of those fins closely resembled wrists, elbows, and primitive limb structures. It also had a mobile neck, something absent in ordinary fish, along with strong ribs capable of partially supporting the body in shallow water. Tiktaalik beautifully documents the evolutionary transition between lobe-finned fishes and early tetrapods. Yet it is important not to imagine it as a fish trying to become an amphibian. It was already perfectly adapted to its own environment. Many traits later useful for life on land probably first evolved because they offered advantages in shallow, oxygen-poor aquatic habitats. Other lineages moved in a direction that would become familiar much later, but had already appeared in the Paleozoic. Osteocephalus, an istopod lepospondyle, had an extremely elongated limbless body and dozens of vertebrae that allowed efficient eel-like locomotion. It represents one of the earliest known examples of convergence toward a serpentine form, long before true snakes evolved. The boomerang-headed forms were not alone. Diceratosaurus, another lepospondyle close to Diplocaulus, carried two long horn-like projections extending backward from the skull. These structures may have served defensive or hydrodynamic purposes. Like many lepospondals, it demonstrates the astonishing diversity of skull shapes that evolved among Paleozoic semi-aquatic vertebrates. In other swamps, skull ornamentation became almost architectural. Zatraches was a temnospondyle with ridges, crests, and heavily textured bone across the head. It likely inhabited swamps and stagnant waterways during the Carboniferous and early Permian, preying on smaller aquatic animals. The elaborate skull ornamentation may have functioned in defense, display, or species recognition. While amniotes were evolving traits that would define the ancestors of reptiles and mammals, other closely related tetrapods were returning to the water. Anthracosaurus, a large semi-aquatic embolomere, possessed a broad flattened skull, strikingly similar to that of modern crocodilians. But its jaws were lined with long, sharp teeth, almost reminiscent of those of snakes, perfect for gripping slippery prey in dark waterways. It belonged to a lineage evolutionarily close to amniotes, the group that would later give rise to reptiles, birds, and mammals. Its amphibian-like appearance likely reflected the retention of ancestral semi-aquatic traits, rather than close affinity with modern amphibians. Strong vertebrae and a powerful body suggest an ambush predator lurking in rivers and swamps. Not every powerful predator remained tied to water. Caecops brought temnospondyle predation onto land. Its name literally means ugly face, and its appearance certainly matched the description. A stocky, muscular, heavily built temnospondyle, it possessed robust limbs and bony armor protecting its spine. It looked almost like a cross between a giant armored frog and a heavily built Gila monster. Unlike many earlier amphibians, Caecops also appears to have possessed relatively advanced hearing adaptations, suggesting greater independence from aquatic habitats. It was among the most specialized terrestrial temnospondals known. Armor appeared in other branches as well. Prionosuchus, a semi-aquatic reptiliomorph, carried overlapping dorsal osteoderms along its back. Its elongated body and relatively strong limbs suggest mobility both on land and in water. Prionosuchus belonged to another enigmatic lineage near the ancestry of amniotes, and demonstrates that sophisticated defensive adaptations evolved long before the appearance of armored dinosaurs. Some lineages escape danger not by growing larger, but by disappearing into the ground. Lysorophus, a recumberostran reptiliomorph, had a long cylindrical body and almost completely reduced limbs. Adapted for burrowing through mud and moist soils, it strongly resembled modern caecilians or eels, despite not being closely related to either. It is one of the clearest examples of fossorial specialization among Paleozoic tetrapods. Aquatic specialization also continued in more agile forms. Sauroplura was slender-bodied, with a laterally compressed tail and a narrow snout lined with sharp teeth. It likely fed on fish and invertebrates. Despite its lizard-like appearance, it belonged to the lepospondals, another reminder that many Paleozoic tetrapods evolved body plans that superficially resemble modern animals, while belonging to entirely different evolutionary branches. And then, the world changed. Toward the end of the Paleozoic, the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea radically altered global climates. The immense tropical wetlands of the Carboniferous began disappearing. Vast regions became increasingly dry and seasonal. Swamps shrank, forests fragmented, and deserts expanded across the interior of the supercontinent. Many amphibian and semi-aquatic tetrapod lineages, still strongly dependent on moist environments and water for reproduction, struggled to survive these changes. Amniotes were better adapted to the drying world, while many amphibious lineages vanished as climates changed, collapse completed by the catastrophic end Permian mass extinction 252 million years ago. Yet the fossil remains of these creatures still reveal something extraordinary. The late Paleozoic was not simply the prehistory of reptiles, mammals, or modern amphibians. It was a world where the basic possibilities of four-limbed vertebrate life were spreading through swamps, rivers, forests, and floodplains. Many of these lineages vanished completely. Others left only distant echoes in the animals that came later. But for a time, Earth belonged to vertebrates that were not fully fish, not fully familiar amphibians, and not yet the world of reptiles and mammals. They were something stranger, the first great radiation of four-limbed life.